Chavre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, and freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. I'm not feeling so well today. I have a shtickle cold, so you'll excuse me if the word today is a bit shorter. We're holding now Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Re'ei Shabbos Mevorchim Chodesh Elul. So, as we all know, Elul is a very fundamental, all-encompassing month. And in our whole relationship with Hashem, and our whole avodas Hashem, serving Hashem, etc., as we'll discuss today. Before that, as usual, since the war started, we get Staka, Gedil, Staka, Shemakarev, Sagula. Mashiach should come now. Now we're going to say a prayer, and this pasuk of Tilim, which we say in the Halalukas, is going to be the central theme of today's shir. Yismach Yisrael b'Yosov, b'nei Tzion Yagilo v'Malkom. The Yidden will rejoice in its maker. The children of Tzion, the Yidden, will delight in their king. So the Alter Rebbe, in chapter 33 of Tanya, brings this pasuk and says, Yismach Yisrael b'Yosov Perush, Shekol Mishu Mizera Yisrael Yesh L'Smer B'Simchas Hashem, Asher Sos V'Samer V'Derosim B'Tachtoinim. It says, Yismach Yisrael b'Yosov, we're talking about Hashem. We are rejoicing in its maker, but it's Hashem being referred to as the maker, which means He's also taking joy in us. In us, meaning the creations in this physical world. Oisav, Miloshan Asiya. So it's our joy in Him, but it's His joy in us too. And then the pasuk says, B'nei Tzion Yagilu v'Malkom. We delight in their king. So this is going to be the theme of today, dealing with the king. Hashem is our king. Before we connect it to the Parsha, when we speak about Chodesh Elul, it's well known, I don't know when this started, definitely like 150 years ago, maybe longer. There's what's called the Chassidish Elul, the way Elul is celebrated, practiced by Chassidim, and then there's the Musar Dike Elul. There was a movement called the Musar movement, and then there was the Chassidim. So there was a whole different approach when it came to the month of Elul. And it is true till this very day. By the Lithuanian yeshivas, and they actually have sometimes a video with the Mashgiach or the Rosh Hashiva. They make a 1-minute video where the camera zooms into him, and then he gives a patch, a bang on the table, on the stender, Elul! He gives a cry out, Elul. And this is the idea that Elul is coming, and we have to get very, very serious. A day of judgment is coming. And this in sync with this two psukim in Amos. One pasuk is Shofar be'ir va'om lo yichradu. The sound of the shofar will be throughout the nation, and the nation won't be trembling. And also there's a pasuk there that says Aryeh shog mila yero. When the lion roars, is then someone who doesn't have fear? So the approach is, the attitude is that there's a day of judgment coming, which is Rosh Hashanah, which is known as a day of judgment. And, and now we have to get really, really serious. That's one approach. That's the approach of the Musar movement. As we know from the Alter Rebbe, the Chassidim, this is one of the things from Teres Chassidus, that through our Rebbe of this generation, the famous parable of the king in the field has become common consciousness and perspective by, it's permeated the entire Jewish world. And that is the analogy of what the Alter Rebbe gives. Why is the month of Elul, even though Rosh Chodesh Elul is Niftachu Sharei Shmayim, the gates of heaven are open. So it should be a day of Yontiv. it says the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachma, 13 attributes of mercy, are illuminating every single day. What does it mean when it's a Jewish holiday? It means the spiritual forces, the spiritual energies that are being elicited and drawn down into this world. If so, the question is, so why are they mundane days? Yemei Choil. They're not Yom Tovim. And the Alter Rebbe gives such a profound, brilliant answer, because that is the whole point. The point is that the king goes out into the field. Excuse me, please. The king goes into the field. There's a king. He's on his way to his palace. And he goes through the field. And he's ready to meet every single person in the field. As the Alter Rebbe says, B'sever ponim yofis, umare ponim shechis l'kulam. He comes with a smiling face and a happy countenance and with love. And he accepts everybody in their farmer's clothes, in their dungarees, in their muddy, dirty outfit. And the Alter Rebbe says this is the contrast. There's the king when he's in his palace, where you need an appointment, you might have to wait months to be able to get a private audience with the king. And it's not open for everybody. But when the king is in the field, and he's smiling at you with a loving face, he's accessible to all, inviting, welcoming with love. That's the analogy, the parable of the Alter Rebbe. So why is it a weekday? Because that's the point. We want to emphasize, the Eibishter wanted that these days should be days where the person is in the field. Even as you are, the way you are, you're in the field. What's the mandate of us? To go out and greet the king and say, here I am. Ani l'doidi, v'doidi li. That's the famous Rosh Hashanah of the word Elul. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. So the point is that it's a declaration of love. It's a declaration of allegiance. We spoke about it recently. Okay. We'll get back to this more, but first I want to show you the connection to this week's Parsha. In this week's Parsha, at the end of the Parsha, it says, in the Pasuk, Tesvav, Kapitel Tezayin, Shivas Yomim Tochig LaHashem Elikecha B'Mokam Ashivcha Hashem, Kivirecha Hashem Elikecha B'chol Tvos B'chol Ma'is Yedecha, Ve'oyisoach Someach. This week's Parsha mentions the 3 regolim, the 3 Yom Tovim. And he says you should be joyous. And Rashi brings out over here, Vayisa Ach Sameach. Ach means is inclusive, and adds more. What does it mean? Lomde Mikan, our sages learn from here, Le Rabbis Leila Yom Tov Achim, to include the night of the last day of the festival, the night of Shmini Atzeres, Le Simcha, in rejoicing. So over here, since we learn a lesson from everything, you'd think that since it's Rosh Chodesh Elul coming, Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, and the lion is roaring, and the nation is trembling, how does it fit that in this week's Parsha should be talking about joy? And the answer is, not only does it talk about joy, it talks about the climax of the joy. It talks about the ultimate, highest level of joy. The joy of Shmini Atzeres, which is the climax of Tishrei, the coming month, which is connected to Simchas Torah. And why? Because that's the point. Even in Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, before we come to Rosh Chodesh, we should have the right mindset. We should have the right attitude. We should have the right approach towards this whole month. And this is in a Maimer of the Rebbe. I'm going to read you inside from a Hasidic discourse of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe says as following. This is a Maimer Re'eya Nechi Tovshem Mem Gimel. And the Rebbe shows that usually we say Ani L'Doidi is this month, that we have to make the first move. Ani L'Doidi. And then there's V'Doidi Li. But the Rebbe says that right away from Elul, when we say Ani L'Doidi, I am to my beloved, we already have in mind V'Doidi Li. We're already visualizing. We're already not imagining, it's not a good word, we're already visualizing the reality of Hashem embracing us and Hashem loving us even more. And this is what the Rebbe says in this Maimon. Listen to these words. Since the month of Elul is not only the conclusion of the previous year, but it's a hachana, it's a preparation to the coming year. So therefore, Hine Yedua Teiris HaBaal Shem Tov, there's known the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, the b'makim shemachshavtei shalodam shomu nimtza. In the place where your thoughts are, that's where you are. Last week he said, put your mind in the right place and your heart will follow. Put your mind in the right place and it's as if you're there. V'kiven shemachshavtei nimtzu b'simcha g'dola. The Shmini Atzeres, since in your mind you are already by the joy of Shmini Atzeres, which the joy of Shmini Atzeres is Yiu l'chol levatcha vein l'zara mitoch. It says that the intimacy between Hashem and the Jews is in the holiday of Shmini Atzeres, the highest, the greatest joy. Every day of the Yontiv of Sukkot, we bring sacrifices representing the 70 nations. And Shmini Atzeres is the Eibishter, the famous analogy. He says, I have one more day where I want to spend with you alone. That's what it means. And there's one carbon representing the Jews, and it's a no malku b'chidoi. It's us and the King alone together. That's it. In other words, the greatest level of intimacy. One-on-one, alone. Okay. So the Rebbe says that your mind is already by the Simcha of Shmini Atzeres. And then he says, already by Rosh Chodesh Elul. And even before that, by Shabbos Mevorchem Elul, this Shabbos Mevorchem. Nimtzu b'machshavtei b'asimcha the Shmini Atzeres v'simchas Torah. This is the Rebbe explicitly in a Maimer. Already by this Shabbos we find ourselves with the joy of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. Since in the place where your thoughts are, that's where you're found. So you're already there in a state of mind of Shmini Atzeres by Shabbos Mevorchem Elul. And therefore he says, we see that from this, that even by Chodesh Elul, there's already the inyan of Deidili, how my beloved is to me. So this is wild. How the Rebbe, before we even starting the actual month of Elul, where we're talking about Tshuva, he's already saying that in the mindset, we're already by the Simcha of Shmini Atzeres. This is the Hasidic approach. This is the novelty of the Rebbe. This is Chassidus in general, the idea of always the redemptive angle, the positivity, the joy. So let's talk about it for a bit. In general, and we're going to get into a discussion about Chassidus, and what was the contribution of Chassidus. Now this is a huge discussion. So many pages have been written about what is the novelty, the Chiddush of Teres Chassidus. What did the Baal Shem Tov innovate? Why was there a need for Chassidus? So whatever the reason is, but at that time, somehow, certain fundamentals, themes of Judaism were underground, so to speak, not stressed enough. For example, some people, they could think that Yiddishkeit is about the rules, regulations, and restrictions. There's a whole Shulchan Aruch. It tells you which shoe you should put on which leg first, and then which shoe to tie first, and so on and so forth. From the cradle to the grave, it covers every single aspect of your life. There's a lot of rules. And it seems like it doesn't end, etc., etc., the entire Shulchan Aruch. But that's one way to look at Judaism. It's a bunch of rules. And then it's all about the relationship. Of course we have to keep the rules. Just like in a marriage, if you don't have the couple being faithful to each other, it's not a marriage. That's the rules. But what happens if someone's going to ask you, what's marriage about? The couple remaining faithful? No. Marriage is about an atmosphere of ava, v'achva, sholim, v'reyush, gila, rina, ditza, v'chedva. There's certain borders, there's certain boundaries, there's certain framework. When in that framework, the love flourishes, you have to be faithful to each other. Now it's similar to Yiddishkeit. The rules and the regulations and the restrictions bring out the true beauty of what a Yid is, and fosters and enhances our intimacy and our closeness with the Eibishter. But if a person stresses that Yiddishkeit is about the rules and regulations and restrictions, and they're missing the point of the relationship, so then it could veer off the path. And then the relationship that you have with Hashem could feel as a burden. Oya brach. The Rebbe once spoke about how this saying of Oise Shvertz is eine Yid. There's a song and there's an expression, Oise Shvertz is eine Yid. It's very difficult to be a Jew. The Rebbe was against that attitude completely. You have to look at the fact that you're a Jew as Ashereinu Matev Chalkeinu Umanoim Garaleinu. He spoke about it in context of Meida Ani L'Fanech, which we say every morning. We say Bechem LaRabba. It's the greatest kindness that the Eibishter chose us and brought us close to Him. And that's why, by the way, in another Sikha, the Rebbe talks about Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li, because that encapsulates the whole idea. Ani L'Deidi, I am to my beloved, V'Deidi Li. So the emphasis is on the Deidi. Everything else is explanation. The main point is to remember that thing, the relationship. By the way, I think we spoke about this many times. Rashi in the beginning of Shir Hashirim, Kol HaSvarim Kodesh, or B'Sefer Zeh is Kodesh Kodesh. All the Svarim are holy, but Shir Hashirim is the holiest of holies. Why? Because if you have a couple, and you say they do things together, they go shopping together, they go hiking together, they play Scrabble together, they learn Torah together, they daven together, whatever it is. So those are manifestations of the love. But what's the main thing? The love. So too, this is what Rashi means. The Sefer Shir Hashirim, that is a whole Sefer that talks about the love between Hashem and Yidden. That's really the heart of it all. That's why it's Koche Koche. All the rest of the Svarim is Kodesh. It describes the framework, the rules, and the regulations of how the love could flourish. Like, for example, because they love each other, they'll go shopping together, they'll learn Torah together, whatever the story is. But the main point is that they love each other. So this is what it means. At the beginning, and the emphasis, before we even start, we have to start with the right attitude. You're dealing with a king that loves you and is greeting you, and he's going out to go to you as you're in the farm with your farmer's clothes, in the mud with the dirty clothes, and he's ready to greet you like that. But you have to express your love to him and cry out to him with humility. Tate, tate. Acknowledge him as the Father, as the one who has an unlimited love. Heart to heart. Your expression of love to him. Love begets love. His expression, the Abish's expression of love to you, that he goes out to you and greets you in the field. That in turn arouses you with the love to him. And we go with such approach. We're already thinking about the joy of Shmini Atzeres. As Rashi brings down in this week's Parsha, and the Rebbe, that Maimer says that from Shabbos Mevorchim, we're already thinking about this joy of Shmini Atzeres. it's interesting that there's a certain person in Melbourne, one of the teachers in Yeshiva Gedol, and he says that the difference between before he came to Chabad and after was that in his shul, you know, when they daven slichas and they say the Avinu Malkeinus, they always sing the last part. I say, and the way he says over the word, he goes like when he speaks about it, he says, I say monu chesed v'yemes. So it's Asei Monu. We're worried about the court case. We're worried that the court case, the judgment, should work out good. But by Lubavitch we sing Avinu Malkeinu, Ein lanu melech, Ein lanu melech, Ela Ata. So the emphasis is on Melech, that we're thinking that we have a Melech. We're happy that we have a Melech. We know that the Melech loves us. We feel infinite gratitude that the Melech chose us to be part of his team, and that we can be on the team, and that we can serve him. And that's how we started today's shir. B'nei Tzion Yagilu v'Malkom. Yagilu. We have joy v'Malkom in the idea that there's the king, and the emphasis on the king. And that's the main point of Rosh Hashanah. Maybe in the next couple of weeks we'll get into it. The main point of Rosh Hashanah is not the idea of the judgment. Of course it's a judgment too. But it's the idea of Achtoras HaMelech, the coronation of the king. And it's the bond and the relationship and the special connection that we have to the king. And that the king loves us. Just to finish with the story, there's a Mrs. Esther Sternberg. She was once going through a very, very rough time in life. And it was right before Elul, and Elul was approaching. So she wrote to the Rebbe a letter. And she says that she wrote to the Rebbe that since Elul is coming and the king is in the field, as the Alter Rebbe says, the famous parable, that the king is in the field. So therefore she's asking the Rebbe to intercede on her behalf. People ask tzaddikim to intercede on their behalf, to pray. People go to tzaddikim, they ask them to pray. Anyways, the Rebbe, and she said, since I don't know how to approach the king, she wrote in her letter, since I don't know how to approach the king, I'm asking the Rebbe to intercede. The Rebbe underlined twice the words, I don't know how to approach the king, question mark, exclamation point. And then the Rebbe said, they teach this already in kindergarten. So what the Rebbe was answering was, every single person, bar none, the ABCs. This parable is so well known from the Alter Rebbe that they're teaching it already to kindergarten children. That's like the very, very basics. And that is that we should feel comfortable that the king gave permission and gave us the ability to approach him in our dirty clothes, where we're at, in whatever situation we are. And we should feel comfortable to be able to approach the king. And the main thing, it has to be just with a feeling of humility, but with joy, smiling, and a proclamation of love. The Eibush should help that with our crying out to Hashem, Ani l'doidi, we should see Hashem's response in v'doidi li, in the most best possible way. Begula mitzvah shlema, take it from Yad Mamish, posting from my home. Be'ez Hashem Yisborech, your man in Melbourne.